So this is my third year presenting at this session. This is actually the first year where we've had end user speakers. So we have 2 end user stories to tell this year, which I think is a pretty good thing to have, and I think is a good indication of the momentum with the technology. And so I'll start with a brief overview of augmented reality, followed by guest speakers Ed Moore from Chevron and Marcello Zappetti from Metallpress Gauss, and then we'll move on to a Q&A panel. So I'm not going to give mind-blowing metrics on augmented reality. There certainly are some, but they are very dependent on the specific applications where they're being used. And so for my presentation, what I'd like to do is give a broader overview of some of the concepts of augmented reality, the challenges, the tools, and the general benefits. So when we're looking at cross-industry challenges, if you kind of dig a little deeper into each one of those challenges, they all have something in common, and that's information. So workforce turnover, when workers retire, we get a loss of information, that knowledge, that tribal knowledge, that experience that they've gathered over their 30-plus years of working at a company or within an industry creates a void when they leave. And this is something that I think is not new, but it's accelerating. So I read recently that since 2011, 26 million people in the United States alone reached the age of retirement. And it's estimated that in the next decade, another 50 million will reach the age of retirement. And so that's a lot of knowledge that's basically leaving our industry. So just out of curiosity, is there anyone in this room that fits that bill? Age of retirement in the next 10 years? Okay, we got a couple hands. No need to be shy. You can be proud of being a baby boomer. If you'll see, the bottom point is inexperienced millennials. So if you can't be proud of being a baby boomer, how can I take pride in being a millennial? So when these workers leave, there's that loss of tribal knowledge, and you're also getting these inexperienced workers coming in. And they not only need to be trained, but they need to be provided tools for them to execute their job at a high level. That gets more complicated as product and processes become more complicated. And so we're talking about personalization, modularity, and smart products. And things like automation and Industry 4.0 might make it easier to make these complex products, but it makes the processes more complicated, so it's not a complete solution. And it's also not an issue that's localized to a specific country or a specific company or a specific factory. These are global issues. And so companies that operate globally need to also address the fact that they have a finite excellence resource or experience resource and a need for local expertise. And then the final industry challenge, and I think this is something that permeates through all the rest of them, is coming up with new and better ways to communicate knowledge. And so I have a couple bullet points here to kind of look at various types of knowledge and various types of communication that we need to think about when we're thinking about how information is retained and how information is communicated to these new workers. And so, just for example, explicit versus tacit. Explicit would be just kind of a statement of fact, so 2 + 2 = 4. But tacit knowledge is the knowledge that comes with repeated experience. So a maintenance worker who does a specific procedure 100 times has that tacit knowledge, has that experience, and so they can go do it again with a high level of skill. And then we can look at static and dynamic. And this is in terms of communication. So a static communication could be a binder maintenance manual. And that's not changing despite changing processes and changing variables within a process. Dynamic could be a walkie-talkie, but walkie-talkies don't provide all the type of information that a maintenance worker might need to get their job done. And then the last bullet point here is intrusive versus conducive. So again, looking at binder for a maintenance manual, for example, a maintenance technician who has to go flip through a binder to find out how to address their problem has a new problem, and that's finding the information. And so what we're looking for is methods of communication where the communication of the information helps to address the issue rather than creating a new issue in and of itself. And so there's 4 buckets that I like to think about when I'm thinking about tools of augmented reality. And the first would be 3D visualization, and this is probably the most commonly associated tool with augmented reality. And so this is the step-by-step guidance that you might see in a marketing brochure. And this allows that tacit communication of almost communicating an experience versus just a guide, a written guide. And so I like to think of this kind of like the color by numbers or the paint by numbers. Is anyone familiar with those kits? In that you're able to divorce the complexity or the cognitive complexity of a task with the complexity of the end result. And so the next item would be diagnostic and real-time feedback. And that is something that can be achieved with IoT integration, which allows a maintenance worker or technician to have ongoing communication with their asset or with their machine that they're working on, instead of having to go back and forth maybe between valves and their HMI. And this allows data-driven decision-making and continuous decision-making while they're performing their task. Remote assistance is one that's very interesting and will be touched on quite a bit throughout this session. That's also called over-the-shoulder mentor or over-the-shoulder expert. And what this allows for is someone to remotely tap into the feed of an AR user and provide guidance and telestration, so much like a NFL broadcaster can draw X's and O's on your TV screen to show you what's going on, what you need to look out for. And this really helps to address that issue of workforce turnover and can act as a workforce multiplier, so that expert who's sitting in their cubicle can tap into the feed of 20 different field workers, and they can then operate at a much higher level. And last but not least is workflows and data and engineering data, which can be provided to an AR user. And this isn't as flashy, but it allows access to drawings and work instructions and other PDFs that would otherwise be a disruptive act. So again, looking back at that intrusive versus conducive type of communication, if you can have an AR application that understands the context that the worker is in, then they can pull up those documents and be able to do their task without having to try and figure out where to pull that information from. And so the last thing I'd like to touch on is the benefits. And again, I don't intend to give specific metrics. There are plenty of great, really fascinating metrics out there to all these points that I have. But again, they're also very dependent on the type of application, the job that it's being applied to, and how it's being applied. And so if you would like to talk about some of those interesting metrics after, I can certainly talk to you about those, but they're very detail-oriented, so I don't want to give anyone the wrong impression here. So really, the metrics that you look at, or the benefits that you look at, can be broken down between two main types of applications, whether they're assembly and quality operations or maintenance and service operations. So for assembly and quality operations, we're seeing augmented reality applications provide pretty significant decreases in cycle times, which increases on-time delivery and capacity utilization. We're also seeing reduce in rework and in some cases scrap, which obviously decreases manufacturing cost per unit and increases labor utilization. And then also a reduction in quality spills and nonconformance, which is not only good for your manufacturing operations, but a very important thing for customer satisfaction. And so when we're turning to maintenance and services, we have a different set of benefits. And the one that I think is probably the most important, but likely the hardest to quantify, is the democratization of tribal knowledge. And so this is the one that really helps to act as a workforce multiplier, especially for those industries that are seeing high levels of turnover. And this can accelerate onboarding and reduce that effect of that brain drain that I've been talking about. Also, we're seeing augmented reality applications in maintenance and service increase first-time fix rates and reduce mean time to repair. And so this helps to increase asset uptime, and in the case of field service, can reduce rollouts, which is a pretty significant statistic. And then finally, just in general, AR solutions have been shown to enhance productivity and safety across the board. And so while these aren't specific metrics, I think it's important to kind of have these in the back of your mind when the rest of our speakers come up here and present. So with that, I'd like to thank you and introduce Ed Moore from Chevron. Ed?